everybody, and welcome to the weekly production diary here at Ratliff Mandolins. And the first thing I'm going to tackle this week on this video is the stain job for mandolin number 3 in the batch. If you'll recall, we more or less prepared it for the finish last week, and the things that need to be taken care of now. I put water on it and raised the grain and all like that, so I need to go back over it one more time and make sure that nothing has popped out that needs to be sanded. I need to put a handle in it here so that I can hold it as I'm shooting the finish. And I need to take the fretboard up and put something down in the F-holes so that stain doesn't get down inside the mandolin. Other than that, we are pretty much ready to go. So in a half an hour or so, I can be shooting finish on this mandolin. I talked to the customer last week, and they sent me a picture to try to emulate a copy, and it's going to have basically the color from Mandolin 1217. That seems to be a popular color that I do. So if you want to look that video up, Mandolin 1217, everybody seems to like that color. So I'm going to start with that color, and then instead of it being that color all over, we're going to put just a hint of a light sunburst around the outside, sort of a very weak, not a strong black dark color, but just sort of a little bit darker than the interior. And I'm thinking in my mind that I may put just a hint of yellow in the middle of that coloring for 1217 to give it just a little bit of life, but we'll see when we get there. So I'm going to prepare this thing, and then we'll get some footage of me putting the color on. All right, I'm done with the stain on mandolin number 3. As you can tell, it's a very light, weak sunburst as opposed to a darker, more traditional. This is a little lighter. That's the stain from 1217, that mandolin that I mentioned earlier, with a little bit of burst around it, and it turned out really nice. And it needs to hang there and dry, and then I'll put the first coat, sort of a tack coat on it, to hold all that stain in place while I scrape off the binding and put the peghead logo in and clean off the side dots and that sort of thing. So we're going to let it dry, and then I'm going to shoot a clear coat on it. And while that clear coat dries, I'll work on some of the mandolins here that need peghead binding. And there is one more piece on mandolin number 1. Although it looks like a trussed up mess, when all that string comes off, it'll be fine. Let me take a second here to talk about next week's video. Mandolin number 2, which was the first mandolin in the batch to have its finish applied, by the end of next week we'll have had about 2 weeks or a little longer to hang and cure, and so it'll be ready to put its strings on. So next week we'll be putting the strings on mandolin number 2 in the batch. It's a standard R5 Country Boy with a very pretty curly maple. It's going to a fellow over in North Carolina, and I think he is planning on coming here to pick it up so we get a chance to visit with the customer. And I still have 4 mandolins in the batch that don't have all of the pieces of peghead binding put on, so I'd like to spend a lot of effort next week trying to finish that job if I can. And let's not forget that I have all these mandolins here that I need to get stain and finish on. And at this stage of the game, ideally, I like to get at least 1 a week. It's about what works out to be, 1 a week if everything flows smooth. So I'd like to get stain on the next one in line as well, which will probably be mandolin number 4 here. Now let's talk about mandolin number 1 here and what I'm going to do to it next week. If you'll remember, mandolin number 1 is a master model. It has all this fancy inlay here in around the tailpiece. And we were going to carve the heel, but kind of have a design change here in midstream. And we have decided to take this whole theme here and bring it around to the area where we would carve the heel at. And so I have very roughly penciled on some design ideas, and let me give you a good close-up of that. Let's see, like this right here, so you can see what we've got in mind. Here's a really quick shot of what we already inlaid in the tailpiece area. And here's just a very rough pencil sketch of the idea of what we're going to do in the same manner as what we put on the tailpiece area. A inlaid pattern like this here and here. Now this is subject to change because I've yet to actually do an official drawing, but this will give you a good idea of what we're going to shoot for, and that job will be done next week as well, or at least started. Now let me recap what all got accomplished this week. I did indeed get the final coats of finish on mandolin number 3 in the batch. It's sort of a lighter brown sunburst with just a very little hint of a sunburst around the very edges, as per the customer's request. So that got finished. It's in the hanging, curing stage right now. All of the peghead binding for mandolin number 1 was finished. 3-ply binding on the face and the sides of it. Well, time is a very, very precious thing, and I want to thank you for spending the last few minutes with me on this episode of the Ratliff Mandolins Weekly Production Diary. Please come back next week for the things that I mentioned, and I am certainly looking forward to a weekend of working on a pet project here, a carved Celtic cross. So we'll look forward to seeing you next week on the next episode of the Ratliff Mandolins Weekly Production Diary. Bye.